Power can demand obedience, but it can never force trust. When Salem, a mute Omega maid, crossed paths with the feared billionaire Alpha Dax, he believed he was nothing more than another invisible servant, but one unexpected revelation would expose hidden truths, dangerous secrets, and a bond neither of them saw coming.
The body hit the floor before Salem could move. Blood on white marble. 3 of the most dangerous men in Chicago standing over it like they owned the room, because they did. And then the dying man looked up, found Salem across the room, and smiled, like he had been looking for him for years. The bombing that took your sight, the man rasped, wasn't an accident. Nobody moved. You were the target. The room went silent. And then one of the Alpha Kings, the coldest one, the one who had never once looked at Salem like he was anything more than staff, turned around slowly and said 4 words that changed everything. We already knew that. What does that mean? How long have they known? And why did no one tell him? Stay right here, because what comes next will make you question every single thing you think you know about who is protecting who in this story. Chapter 1. The shouting hit Salem before he even reached the hallway. Loud, violent, close. His hand froze on the cleaning cart. His knuckles went white around the handle. That voice, it was Daxen's. Low, cold, and absolutely furious. Salem had worked in this penthouse long enough to know the difference between Daxen raising his voice and Daxen losing control. This was the second one. He pushed the cart forward anyway. He had floors to clean. He had a job. He had exactly 0 reasons to walk in the direction of whatever was happening behind those double doors. The hallway stretched ahead of him, white marble, low lighting, the hum of the air filtration system above his head. Everything looked the same as it did every night. Quiet, controlled, expensive. He had spent 3 years learning the rhythms of this penthouse. He knew when to appear. He knew when to disappear. And right now, every single instinct in his body was screaming that this was a disappear moment. Then he heard the second sound. Wet, heavy, a body hitting marble. Salem stopped. The doors burst open. 2 men in black dragged someone across the floor. A stranger, bleeding from the mouth, one eye swollen shut, clothes torn like he'd been pulled through concrete. He was alive, barely. His legs dragged uselessly behind him as they threw him down in the center of the living room like he weighed nothing at all. The man hit the marble and didn't try to get up. He just lay there breathing in shallow, wet pulls, one hand pressed flat against the floor. Daxen stood over him. Riker leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, watching with that flat expression that always meant the situation had already been decided and the only thing left was the execution. He wasn't even tense. That was the thing about Riker. The more dangerous the moment, the more still he became. Soren stood near the window, back turned, fingers laced behind him. The city lights spread 40 stories below him, brilliant and indifferent. He was looking at none of it. His stillness was different from Riker's. Riker was calculating. Soren was already somewhere 3 steps ahead. Salem backed up 1 step, then another. He should leave. Right now. Turn the cart around and disappear down the service corridor and act like none of this existed. He'd done it before. There were things that happened in this penthouse that he had learned not to see, learned not to ask about, learned to carry past like bad weather that came and went and wasn't his business. He was staff. He cleaned. He stocked. He maintained the kind of invisible efficiency that good help always maintained in households like this one. Stay. Daxen's voice. 1 word. No inflection. Not a suggestion. Salem stopped moving. His heartbeat climbed into his throat. He turned slowly. Daxen wasn't even looking at him. He was still staring at the man on the floor, but 1 finger was pointed directly at Salem, extended and absolute. Stay. The way you tell a door not to open. The way you stop something without needing to explain why. He stayed. The man on the floor coughed. Blood on the marble, a dark spread of it under his cheek. He lifted his head with effort, and his swollen eye tracked across the room until it found Salem standing at the edge of the light. Then the man smiled. Broken teeth, bloody mouth, and a smile that was worse than anything else in the room because it was knowing. Because it looked at Salem the way people look at something they've been searching for. "That's him," the man rasped. His voice was ruined, but the certainty in it was intact. "That's actually him." Daxen crouched. His voice dropped to something just above a whisper, which was always more dangerous than when he shouted. "Who sent you?" "Doesn't matter." The man laughed again, wet and broken. "You three have been keeping him here for what, 3 years? 4? And you never told him?" He turned his head slightly, like the effort of looking at all 3 brothers at once was worth the pain. "That's almost sweet." Riker pushed off the wall. One step forward. Last chance to answer the question. Hi viewers. If you ever woke up and realized the people around you had been keeping a life-changing secret about you for years, what would be the very first thing you would do? Drop it in the comments right now because Salem is 2 minutes away from finding out exactly what that moment feels like. The bombing. The man's eyes drifted back to Salem. Slow, deliberate, like he was enjoying the delivery. The one that took your sight. You remember it, don't you? That hospital. That explosion. The fire that came through the east corridor before anyone could reach you. He paused. Let that image sit. Everyone said it was random. Wrong place, wrong time. A tragedy. A terrible, unlucky tragedy. The room felt different now. Cold in a way that had nothing to do with the air system. Salem could feel his own pulse in his ears. He could feel the weight of every person in the room pressing toward him without anyone moving. His vision. The peripheral shapes and blurred edges that had remained after the surgery, the soft-lit ghosts of forms and outlines that passed for sight, seemed to narrow down to the shape of the man on the floor. It wasn't random, the man said. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. It was a hit. A very expensive, very specific, very carefully placed hit. His laugh came out like gravel shifting. And the target wasn't the building. Wasn't the doctors. Wasn't any of the other patients in that ward. He looked straight at Salem. Held it. It was you. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Salem had ever heard. Not even breathing. Not a shift. Not a chair. Nothing. Salem's back met the wall. He hadn't realized he'd moved. His hands were flat against the surface behind him, fingers spread wide, pressing into the cold marble like it was the only solid thing left in the world. The pendant at his throat. A small thing he'd worn so long he'd stopped noticing its weight. Suddenly felt heavy. Soren turned away from the window. He crossed the room in measured steps. No rush. No urgency. Like a man who had already decided what needed to happen next and was simply arriving at it. He stopped directly in front of Salem and held something out between 2 fingers. Pendant. Small. Metal. The chain was old silver, darkened at the links. The surface worn smooth at the edges like it had been handled hundreds of times by hands that kept reaching for it. Take it, Soren said. Low. Private. Like the rest of the room didn't exist. Salem's fingers closed around it. Cold. Heavy. He ran his thumb across the face of it and felt the shape. A symbol pressed into the metal. Raised edges. A circle with 3 lines crossing through the center at unequal angles. Asymmetric. Intentional. He knew that symbol. He didn't know how. He couldn't name where it lived in his memory or when he had first seen it. But his body knew. His hands started shaking before his mind finished the thought, fine and uncontrollable, and the pendant rattled once against his palm. You idiots, the man on the floor said. The amusement in his voice was something worse than contempt. Layered, patient, like a man delivering a punchline he'd been holding for years. You've been protecting him this whole time, and you still don't know what you're actually sitting on. Riker moved. The gunshot was clean. Final. The room went quiet in a completely different way than before. The pendant sat cold and still in Salem's hand. He didn't look at the floor. He kept his eyes forward, on the middle distance, on nothing, and breathed. Daxen stood, straightened his jacket, and finally turned to look at Salem directly. Not the way an employer looks at staff, not the way someone looks at a person they hired to polish floors and refill cabinets and exist quietly in the background. The way someone looks at something they have been guarding. Something they have spent years being careful about. Something they could not afford to lose. Riker set the gun down. "We need to talk," he said. And then, from below, rising up through 60 floors of steel and glass and city noise, sirens. More than one. Moving fast. Getting louder with every second like they knew exactly where they were going. Soren's phone lit up on the windowsill. He glanced at the screen once. His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened in that specific way that meant the calculation had just shifted. "They already know he's here," Soren said. "Not a question. Not a guess." Daxen looked at Salem one more time. "Don't move from this room." The sirens rose. Chapter 2. The Hidden Past. Riker pulled up the files before anyone sat down. Not files from a drawer. Not paper in a folder. He connected directly to an encrypted server, buried, rerouted through 6 different proxy nodes, inaccessible from any standard network, and the screens along the east wall lit up simultaneously. Documents, photographs, medical records with large sections redacted in black. Lab results dated almost 2 decades back. Images of a building that looked like a hospital from the outside and nothing like one once you got past the lobby. Salem stood in the center of the room. Still, quiet, still holding the pendant. The sirens outside had faded 10 minutes ago. Cole's security team had run a perimeter sweep and come back clean, for now. The building was locked. The floors were secured. And the 4 of them were alone in a room full of information that Salem had never been meant to see. Until now. "The building where you lost your sight," Riker began, and his voice was flat. Not cold exactly, but controlled. The way a person speaks when they have rehearsed the words too many times and emotion has been worked out of them through repetition. "It wasn't a hospital." Salem's fingers tightened around the metal. The name on the sign said hospital. The staff wore scrubs. The intake paperwork looked clean, complete, standard in every way that mattered on a surface level. Riker tapped the screen and a photograph expanded. A facility with white walls, long clinical corridors, examination rooms staged to look routine. But wrong. The windows were sealed shut with no exterior hardware. The visitor log showed the same 4 names cycling every week without variation. The parking lot had no patient vehicles, only fleet vehicles. It was a Helix Dominion research facility. One of 12 they operated under medical cover across the Midwest between 2006 and 2014. "Helix Dominion," Salem said. He repeated the name slowly, carefully, testing its weight in his mouth, looking for a memory that matched it. There was something, faint, like a word heard through a closed door, but nothing he could hold on to. "I've never heard that name before." "You weren't supposed to," Daxen said. He was standing near the window again, arms behind his back, facing partly away. The city light hit the line of his jaw and left the rest of him in shadow. That was deliberate. Helix didn't operate with a public brand. No advertising. No news coverage. No digital footprint that lasted longer than 72 hours before it was scrubbed. "Corporate shell structure," Riker continued. "Military contracts on paper. Private funding that traces through 11 shell companies before it disappears into offshore infrastructure that no single government has jurisdiction over." He pulled up another document. A funding map, lines connecting entity names across 3 continents. They ran genetic studies, specifically on omega children between the ages of 4 and 12. The air in the room changed. Salem looked at the map, then at Riker. "Bond stabilization research," Soren said from the couch. He hadn't moved since they'd come in. He sat with his elbows on his knees, watching Salem with the careful attention of someone reading a reaction they need to understand completely. The working theory was that certain omega genetic profiles could produce a measurable biochemical effect in alpha subjects, stabilizing their neurological aggression patterns, reducing cortisol spikes, improving executive function during high-stress conditions. He paused. They were trying to turn a biological phenomenon into a controllable tool. "They were experimenting on children," Salem said. The statement sat in the room without decoration. Yes, Soren said. To see if Omega children could be engineered into something that controls alphas. No one answered. The silence was its own answer, the specific silence of people who have already processed the horror and are now past it, standing in the territory of what comes next. Most of the subjects didn't survive the process, Riker said, and for a fraction of a second something moved behind his eyes that wasn't analytical. It was gone before it fully formed. The ones who survived had incomplete outcomes. Bond activation would begin and then collapse within days. Stabilization effects would appear and then fail. The research kept stalling at the same wall. He let that sit a beat. Except with one subject. The screens shifted. A new file loaded. At the top where a name should have been a number. 017. Salem looked at it for a long moment. The document was dense. Genetic sequencing charts, bond frequency measurements, biochemical response tables. But the section at the bottom was written in plain language. A summary notation. Written by someone who wanted the finding to be clearly understood. Subject 017 demonstrates multibonding capacity with no observable ceiling. Unlike all prior subjects, 017 shows the ability to form concurrent, simultaneous bonds with multiple alpha leaders without degradation. Stabilization is permanent rather than cyclical. Bond activation produces no adverse physiological response in the subject and generates measurable behavioral improvement in all bonded alpha parties. Profile is unprecedented. Subject classified as final prototype. No replication achieved. Salem read it twice. That's not possible, he said. Concurrent bonding with multiple alphas. Biologically, that doesn't exist, Soren finished. That's what the scientific community said. And they were right that it had never been documented before. He held Salem's gaze. Before you. The pendant felt heavier in Salem's hand. He set it down on the nearest surface. He needed his hands empty. He needed to think with his whole body, and holding something made that harder. He crossed both arms over his chest instead and stood there working through the information with the deliberate focus of someone who has trained himself to process shock without going under. You found all of this before you hired me, he said. He looked at each of them in turn. 1, 2, 3. Not accusatory. Just placing the fact. Yes, Riker said. When I came in for the interview. When you gave me the contract. When you showed me the supply closets and the cleaning schedule and the rules about which rooms were off-limits. His voice stayed level. You already knew who I was. Daxen finally turned from the window and faced him fully. We knew your genetic profile. We knew your history. We knew what Helix had classified you as. He crossed the room slowly, stopping far enough away to give Salem space but close enough that his voice could drop. We didn't know you. That part took time. Salem looked at him for a beat. But you kept it from me. Yes. You let me clean your floors and bring your coffee and think I was just an employee. You were an employee, Riker said. Everything you were paid, every hour you worked, every benefit in your contract. That was real and it still is. We needed you safe and close. The job was the safest way to accomplish that without putting a target on you. Keeping me close to protect me without telling me I needed protecting. Salem exhaled once through his nose. Long controlled. You decided that was better than just telling me the truth. Nobody argued with the observation. Salem turned back toward the window. The city spread out below in all its ordinary, brilliant indifference. People moving through their nights. Traffic running its patterns. Everything continuing exactly as it should. Completely unaware that 40 stories up a man was standing in the middle of a life he suddenly did not recognize. Tell me about Helix reactivating the search, he said. Riker picked up the tablet. As of 48 hours ago, their retrieval parameters went live again. New team. Deeper funding. The operation they're running now is not reconnaissance. He turned the screen. A single line of text. Clean. Bureaucratic. Terrifying in its simplicity. Locate and retrieve experiment 017. Alive. Priority Alpha. They want me back, Salem said. Yes. Alive. Which is the only reason we still have time to move before they push harder, Riker said. Daxen took one more step forward. Salem. I need a minute, Salem said. Not sharp, not broken, just factual. A person asking for 30 seconds to carry a new weight before they start walking with it. He stood at the window and gave himself that minute. And 60 stories below, parked along the curve of the service road where it bent behind the tower, 2 black SUVs sat with their engines running. They had not been there an hour ago. Chapter 3, The Power of Presence, started small. So small that none of them reached for an explanation at first, because the explanation, when it finally came, was not the kind anyone was ready to write down. What were they going to put in a report? That their maid had a calming effect on 3 of the most dangerous men in Chicago. That the temperature of a meeting room changed when a particular person was or wasn't standing in it. That aggression, the kind baked into them at a molecular level, the kind that had fueled their rise and held their empire together, went quiet in a way that strategy and discipline had never fully achieved. Nobody was writing that down. Daxen noticed it first. 3 months after Salem started working in the penthouse, they had a sit-down with the Ramos crew. Territorial dispute. The third one in 2 years, the kind that had historically ended with someone leaving the building in noticeably worse condition than when they arrived. Daxen had gone into that meeting already activated. 3 days without sleep. An arms deal that had gone sideways in Memphis. 2 of his men in the hospital with injuries that were his fault for sending them underprepared. He was running on anger and black coffee and the specific type of barely leashed fury that made everyone in a room choose their words carefully. Salem had been in the kitchen when the Ramos men arrived. Restocking shelves. Moving quietly. Existing in that particular way he had, present but peripheral, noticed only when you were specifically looking. 40 minutes into the meeting, Daxen realized he hadn't raised his voice once. The negotiation was actually moving. Not through threats. Not through the particular brand of pressure that usually got things across the finish line. Through actual conversation. He had made concessions he'd planned to fight over. The Ramos crew had matched them. Both parties had left with something workable and nobody had needed to be reminded of consequences. Daxen sat alone in the conference room afterward and stared at the table. He did not connect it to Salem. Not then. He credited the sleep deprivation. Sometimes exhaustion stripped away the combativeness and left something more functional underneath. He moved on. Riker noticed it second. A board session with their financial partners. A meeting that had been contentious for 3 consecutive quarters, the kind where someone always left the room angry and the paperwork dragged out for weeks. This one moved through in 50 minutes. Clean. Every item resolved. Riker had walked out feeling a specific kind of focused clarity. Unhurried, sharp, not driven by urgency but by actual precision. That he hadn't felt since he was 19 and still knew enough to the work that adrenaline hadn't yet replaced thinking. He mentioned it to no one. Salem had been down the hall organizing the supply cabinet. The door had been open. He'd been close enough that his movement created a faint shift in the air at the edge of the meeting room. Soren figured it out last. He was the pattern reader. Not formally. He had no degree in it, no clinical methodology. But of the 3 brothers he was the one who watched sequences and noticed where they broke or held. One evening he sat at his desk with a plain yellow legal pad and started writing down every significant meeting, every high-pressure negotiation, every moment of conflict or near conflict that had occurred in the penthouse over the past 18 months. Next to each one he wrote one word. Present. 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 Not present. Not present. 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 Not present. Present. He stared at the list for a long time. Then he drew a line down the center and put the outcomes on the right side. The correlation was not subtle. He brought it to his brothers at 2 in the morning, set the legal pad on the kitchen counter between them and said one word. Salem. They tested it the next day. Deliberately. Systematically. No emotion in the methodology, just a hypothesis and a controlled environment to run it through. They scheduled a planning session for a deal already closed. No real stakes. No outcome pressure. Just a reason to be in a room. They had Salem bring in coffee. arrange the materials on the table, stay nearby to attend to whatever was needed. The effect arrived within 6 minutes of him walking in. Daxen, who paced during every meeting without exception, sat still. Riker, who dominated every discussion as a matter of habit, listened. Soren, who ran cold logic without input from either of them because input usually introduced inefficiency, found himself thinking in new directions. Following threads he would have cut off 20 minutes earlier, arriving at conclusions that were better than the ones he'd started with. 3 men operating at a level of function that none of their training or experience had ever produced independently. No friction between them, no instincts firing sideways. No aggression leaking into the space between ideas. Just clarity. Salem collected the empty cups, excused himself with the quiet efficiency that had become his defining characteristic, and walked back down the hall. The moment the door closed behind him, all 3 brothers felt it. A drop, not the air. Something underneath it. The way warmth withdraws when you step out of a lit room and into a dark hallway, immediate, specific, impossible to mistake for anything else. The meetings' easy quality receded. The slight edge that lived permanently between 3 alpha leaders reasserted itself inside 30 seconds. Daxen looked at his brothers across the table. Nobody spoke. Riker exhaled once. "Long, we have a problem." "We have an answer," Soren said. "Whether we wanted one or not." They ran 2 more tests that week. Same results. Every time with no variation. Presence, clarity. Absence, friction. The margin was not small and it was not ambiguous. Soren was the one who caught the next detail. He was reviewing building security footage for an unrelated issue, a delivery discrepancy on the 44th floor, when he happened across the timestamp from the Tuesday planning session. He watched Salem come in with the tray, set down the cups, stand near the credenza for what should have been a neutral, professional beat before excusing himself. Soren rewound it, watched it again, leaned closer. Salem's expression during that session was not neutral, not calm in the way of a person simply doing their job. There was color in his face that hadn't been there when he came in. His breath was slightly faster, visible in the shift of his shoulders, the small controlled inhale before he spoke. And he had stood there for a moment too long, not confused, not distracted, more like he was waiting for something inside himself to settle before he trusted his legs to move normally. Soren sat back in his chair and stayed there for a long time. An omega response, not forced, not triggered by external stimulus. Organic, the kind that happens when a bond begins to stir before either party has named what is happening, before either side has agreed to it. The biology moving ahead of the people attached to it because biology does not wait for permission. He held that information for 2 days, turning it over, measuring its weight against everything he knew about their situation, their history, and what it would mean if the activation had already begun on Salem's side without any of them choosing it. Because a bond that started on its own did not stop on its own. He sent his brothers one message at 11:43 on a Thursday night. "We're past the point of watching." Riker replied in 58 seconds. "Confirmed. Same readings on my end for 6 weeks. Daxen did not reply. He appeared in Soren's office doorway instead. No knock. He just stood there with his jaw set and his eyes running the particular calculation that always meant he was processing outcomes he had already decided he didn't like. "How long has it been activating?" he said. Soren met his gaze. "Since before we ran the tests. The tests just confirmed what was already in motion. And if it completes, then it's permanent, stable, irreversible." Soren didn't soften it. There was no version of this that benefited from softening. For all 3 of us simultaneously, that's the entire point of what he is, Dax. That's why 017 was classified as the final prototype. Every other subject bonded partially or not at all. He bonds completely, with all 3. Daxen turned toward the window. His reflection looked back from the dark glass, sharper than usual, more tired. "He doesn't know any of it," Daxen said quietly. "No," Soren agreed. "He doesn't." The city ran its patterns below. The building was quiet. 3 floors down, in the staff quarters at the end of the east corridor, a light was still on under a door. And on the monitoring screen behind Soren's shoulder, a small alert pulsed orange. Ground-level camera. Service road. A black SUV. Engine running. Parked without plates. It had been there for 4 hours. Chapter 4. First intimate collision. The meeting was already tense before the first person sat down. Daxen had brought in 3 men from the east side. Expensive suits, clean shoes, the kind of faces that had learned long ago to give nothing away across a table. They arrived at 10:55, 2 minutes early, which meant they had been outside waiting and had chosen their entrance timing deliberately. Small things. The kind of small things Daxen noticed and cataloged without commenting on. Riker was at the head of the table running final numbers on a deal that needed to close by Friday. 200 million in restructured assets across 4 holding entities, and the margin for error was the kind that made even experienced men careful. He had 3 tablets open in front of him, cross-referencing in real time, a half-empty coffee cup going cold at his elbow. Soren sat to the left, silent, absorbing the room with that particular quality of attention that looked like passivity and was anything but. The guests took their seats, and the room had that charge. The specific electrical pressure of real money and real stakes occupying the same air as people who did not fully trust each other but needed each other anyway. Salem came in at 11:15 with the second round of coffee. He moved with the practiced care that 3 years in this penthouse had built into muscle memory. Aware of every corner, every edge, every occupied chair and the radius of space around it. The tray was heavier than the morning round. 6 cups instead of 4. He distributed the first 4 cleanly, moving around the table with the efficiency of someone who understood that invisibility was its own form of skill. The 5th cup was for Daxen. He reached across the corner of the table, misjudging the distance by 2 inches, the edge of the tray catching the lip of a document binder. And the cup shifted. Coffee sloshed over the rim in a fast, dark arc, moving toward the papers spread across the table. Daxen's hand closed around Salem's wrist. Not rough, not reactive. Precise, the kind of movement that comes from reflexes that have been sharpened past the point of hesitation. The motion arrested. The tray steadied. The damage stopped at a few drops on the table surface, nowhere near the documents. But neither of them moved after that. Daxen's grip stayed. Salem went completely still. The hold wasn't tight. It wasn't aggressive. It was just present. Warm and certain and large, fingers that wrapped nearly all the way around Salem's wrist without effort, like it was the natural size for the space. Salem could feel Daxen's pulse where their skin connected. Slow, steady, almost unreasonably calm for a man in the middle of a high-stakes negotiation. His own pulse was doing the opposite. They were too close. That was the problem. The reach had closed the distance between them. Salem was leaning across the corner of the table and Daxen had moved toward him in the same moment, and now they were occupying a space that had approximately 12 inches of air between them. He could feel Daxen's breath. Could hear it, controlled, but slightly different than it had been 30 seconds ago. Could feel the exact moment Daxen became aware of the same things. Something in the air of the room shifted. Not dramatically. Not loudly. But the 3 guests in expensive suits adjusted in their seats. Riker looked up from the tablets. Soren's gaze moved off the documents in front of him and settled on the 2 of them with the focused calm of a person watching something they have been expecting. I'm sorry. Salem pulled back. Daxen released him. Slowly. Not immediately. There was a beat, a fraction of a second that was not quite hesitation but not quite decisiveness either, before his fingers opened and let go. Salem straightened, picked up the tray, set down the last cup for the guest at the far end of the table without spilling a drop, because his hands had steadied the way hands sometimes do when the rest of you is working very hard to appear normal. He gathered the empty cups from the first round, moved to the door. He did not look back. But the flush at the back of his neck was visible above his collar, and his shoulders carried a tension on the way out that hadn't been there on the way in. The meeting ran another 20 minutes. It went cleanly, faster than the previous 3 sessions with this same group, the numbers resolving with less resistance than Riker had budgeted for. When the guests stood, shook hands, and were escorted to the elevator by Cole's team, the 3 brothers were left alone in a room that felt noticeably different from the one the guests had just vacated. Riker set down his pen. "The one on the left," he said. "Second chair from the window." He didn't look at the documents once after Salem came in. Daxen stood, still. "He was watching Salem the entire time," Riker continued. "Not casually. Not the way you notice someone in a room. The way you look at something you've been told to identify." Soren had the building security system open on his tablet before Riker finished the sentence. He ran the face, the man's angle from the lobby camera, the elevator timestamp, the brief moment at the front desk where he turned fully toward the lens without knowing it. The scan ran for 40 seconds. The match loaded. No business registration. No corporate address. The profile that came back was 3 layers deep in contractor networks, private security, intelligence-adjacent work that never surfaced publicly and always paid well. And at the bottom of the file, a single organizational flag. Helix. Daxen's jaw set. "He was in this room," Riker said, voice dropping. "While Salem was standing right there. While we were all right there. He sat across from us for 40 minutes. He wasn't here for the deal," Soren said. "There was no deal for him. The other 2 were legitimate, they'll close and they'll be useful. He came with them for access." "Confirmed location," Daxen said. "Yes." Soren was already running the lobby access log. He paused at the front desk for 11 minutes before coming up. Visitor network connection. Long enough to push a transmission. He reported in before the meeting even started, Riker said. The room was very quiet. Daxen walked to the door, opened it. The hallway stretched ahead. White marble, low light, the ordinary architecture of a building that contained far more than it showed. At the far end, past the kitchen corridor, Salem was restocking the linen shelf. Back turned, earbuds in, moving through the ordinary mechanics of an ordinary task with no idea that a man had just spent 40 minutes sitting 20 feet away from him confirming he was alive. Daxen watched him for a moment. Something crossed his expression. Not cold. Not calculated. Something that didn't belong in a business meeting and made no effort to hide itself. He turned back to the room. Full security review on everyone in this building who had access to the visitor floor today. And pull every camera from the lobby window back 12 hours. Soren was already working. For names came back. All Helix flagged. All in the building within the same window. All arrived and departed through different entry points so no 2 appeared together on the same feed. Not a scout. An advanced team running a confirmation sweep. The building's internal security line buzzed. Sharp. Cutting across the quiet. Riker picked it up, listened for 3 seconds without speaking, then set it down with the deliberate care of a person controlling their reaction. "Stairwell on 47, he said. "Key card system was bypassed 6 minutes ago. Someone's already inside." Daxen looked at the hallway door, then at the screens, then at his brothers. "Move." Chapter 5, The Hunters Arrive. The first SUV was already in position when the second one arrived. Black, unmarked, government plates that were not government. The registration traced back to a shell company that had been dissolved 18 months ago and recreated under a different name in a different state 3 weeks after that. Standard operating procedure for operations that needed the appearance of legitimacy without any of its accountability. They pulled into position along the service road behind the tower with the practiced efficiency of a team that had run this approach before. Maybe on a different building. Maybe on a building exactly like this one. Engines running. Windows sealed. Waiting. Soren watched them on the secondary security feed, the one routed through an external server that their building's own system didn't know existed. A redundancy they had built in years ago for exactly this kind of moment. 6 entry points covered, he said. His voice was level. It was always level. Ground floor north, south, parking structure east and west, roof access, and the service tunnel under the loading dock. They know the layout, Riker said. They've had the floor plans for a while. Soren switched to the roof camera. 2 figures on the east parapet. Black tactical gear, movement slow and deliberate, rappelling equipment already anchored. These aren't improvised positions. This was staged. Riker was already on the radio with Cole. His voice dropped to the register that Cole had learned, over 11 years, to treat as absolute. Lockdown on 45 through 50. Every stairwell, verified ID only, physical verification, no card-only access. Get 2 bodies on Salem's position right now. Do not wait for my confirmation to move. Cole cut out without acknowledging. He didn't need to acknowledge. He was already moving. Daxen pulled on his jacket. Not the suit jacket that lived on the back of his chair. The other one, black, fitted close, the kind that moved with a person instead of against them. Who are they? Salem's voice. From the doorway. All 3 brothers turned. He stood at the entrance to the main room. Still wearing the soft gray staff uniform he'd been in all evening. Still holding the folded linen from the shelf he'd been restocking when the alert reached him through the building's secondary PA. The quiet single-tone signal that meant something different than fire drill, and fire drill meant something different than this. His expression was contained. Alert. Not frightened in the way that makes people useless, but in the way that sharpens everything. He was watching them the way someone watches a situation they have decided to understand rather than run from. Helix Dominion, Soren said. Clean. No preamble. Corporate retrieval operation. Private military contracts. They have no legal standing inside this building, and they are not here with any kind of official authorization. He paused 1 beat. Which means they are not planning to knock. How long have they been out there? Salem said. This formation? 20 minutes. Riker didn't look up from the tablet he was running access logs on. Prepositioning for this operation? At minimum 48 hours since the retrieval order activated. Probably longer. Salem set down the linen. He didn't move toward the window or toward the door or toward any of the screens. He stood in the center of the room and absorbed the information with the stillness of someone who has learned, through specific experience, the kind that marks a person, that panic costs more than it buys. On the security monitors, the SUVs still hadn't moved. The 3rd one had arrived. Parked farther back from the other 2. Angled differently, not blocking approach, not covering an entry point. Positioned with sightlines to both the main road and the service route simultaneously. That one's covering retreat, Soren said. Theirs or ours? Riker asked. Ours. Soren pulled up the overlay. They've accounted for evacuation routes. Every standard exit from this building is being observed. They're not trying to prevent escape. They're trying to control where escape goes. So they can intercept at a point of their choosing, Daxen said. Yes. The building lockdown engaged on floors 45 through 50. No announcement, no alarm, just the quiet mechanical certainty of reinforced steel doors sealing across 6 floors at once. The security system shifted from passive monitoring to active response mode. External cameras switched from standard feed to motion-prioritized high-frame. The perimeter lighting adjusted automatically, eliminating the 2 shadow corridors along the south face that their standard nighttime setup left unmonitored. The walls along the east corridor opened. Sliding panels, smooth, flush, built into the architecture so perfectly that they looked like wall segments until they moved. Salem had walked past them at least 200 times. He had never seen them move. They revealed equipment bays behind the marble. Communications hardware in reinforced cases, encrypted radio systems running on closed frequencies, a tactical operations board that was already populated with building schematics and personnel positions. 2 men arrived from the service elevator. Not Cole's standard security, something else, something with the quiet and economy of people who spent their entire professional lives preparing for exactly this specific type of situation. They positioned outside the main room without instruction and faced outward. No introduction, no acknowledgement. They simply materialized and covered the corridor. Salem looked at all of it. The panels, the hardware, the men, the screens. You have an entire operation inside this building, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation landing after 3 years of not knowing it existed. Yes, Riker said. How many people? Enough. That's not an answer. Riker looked up from the tablet. Something in his expression acknowledged that. 43 active personnel across the building's secure floors. 12 on external monitoring. 8 specialized response. He held Salem's gaze. They've been here the whole time you've been here. Salem processed that. The scale of it. The infrastructure of an operation that had been running silently around the edges of his ordinary daily life. The cleaning schedules and staff meals and linen inventory. Without a single visible seam. Was any of it real? He said. The question was quiet. Not bitter. Just real. Daxen looked at him. All of it was real. The work. The salary. The 3 years. Everything you did here was genuine. His voice carried something under the professional surface. Something that didn't perform, didn't justify, didn't negotiate. And so was every decision we made to keep you breathing. Salem held that, turned it over, set it somewhere he could come back to. Daxen moved to the security wall. 12 screens. Every camera in and around the tower. He moved through them methodically: ground floor, lobby, parking structure, service entrance, roof access, the exterior corners where the building met the street. His eyes tracked each feed with the disciplined attention of someone who has read threat environments for 20 years and knows exactly what normal looks like and exactly what doesn't. 2 on the roof, east side, he said. Confirmed, Soren said. Service entrance south is compromised. They have someone in the utility alcove outside the door. He hasn't moved in 14 minutes. He's waiting for a signal. They're running a coordinated push, Riker said. Not a raid. A sweep. Every point activates simultaneously. What's their trigger? Daxen asked. Us, Soren said. Once they confirm all 3 of us are in the same position long enough to predict movement, they activate. He looked at the screens. Which means the longer we stay still, the closer we get to that window. The communications board lit. Cole's voice, tight, controlled, the specific register of a man delivering information he does not like delivering. For unconfirmed subjects in the stairwell between 43 and 46. Armed. Moving upward. Staggered spacing. They're trained. Hold the door on 45, Daxen said. Nothing gets to 46. Copy. The line stayed open. Then a sound that wasn't Cole. Different voice. Lower register. Calm in the practiced way that people who deliver ultimatums for a living learn to be calm. Penthouse level. This is Helix Retrieval Team 7. Our objective is singular. We are not here for the Varelli organization. Stand down and step aside and this building stays intact. Silence across the open line. This is your only warning. You have 60 seconds. The line cut. Riker reached under the communications board with one hand and came back with a handgun. Checked the chamber. Set it on the table surface, within reach but not in hand. Still and ready like everything else in this room. Soren was at the systems board, rerouting the feeds from the camera blackout sections, rebuilding the surveillance picture one node at a time. His hands moved quickly and without wasted motion. He had the expression of a man who is angry and is using the anger correctly, pointing it into precision instead of letting it scatter. Salem stood in the center of the room, breathing evenly, hands at his sides. He was watching Daxen's back with the focused attention of someone who is calculating something, not what to do, but whether they are ready to do it. Daxen turned and found him standing there. I told you to stay between us. I heard you, Salem said. He took one step forward, then another, not behind Daxen, beside him, shoulder parallel to shoulder, occupying the same forward position, facing the same direction. It was not submission. It was not performance. It was a man who had just learned that he had been protected in the dark for 3 years, deciding, fully consciously, that he was done standing behind anything. Something moved in Daxen's expression. Brief, unguarded, gone before it could be named. Then the stairwell door at the end of the corridor buckled inward from the pressure of something heavy and deliberate being applied to the other side. And the lights went out. What are your thoughts? If you woke up tomorrow and found out 3 of the most dangerous men alive had been silently protecting you for years without ever saying a single word, would you feel safe or would you feel like a prisoner? Tell me in the comments right now, because Salem has exactly 3 seconds to decide exactly that, and the answer changes everything that comes next. Chapter 6. Protective Alpha Instincts. The darkness lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds of absolute black. No emergency lighting, no screen glow, no city light bleeding through the windows because the blackout curtains had deployed automatically the moment the power cut. 4 seconds where the only information available was sound. The buckled stairwell door grinding against its frame. Boots on concrete 2 floors below, moving upward with the measured pace of people who had done this before and were not in a rush because they believed they had already won. Then the backup system kicked in. Red. Low. Emergency grid, enough to see shapes, enough to navigate, not enough to work by. The screens along the east wall rebooted in sequence. Feeds coming back one at a time like eyes opening after a hard blow. Daxen was already moving. Cole, stairwell 45, seal it now. His voice carried across the room without rising. Don't wait for them to reach the door. Doors jammed. Cole came back. They cut the magnetic lock from the panel on 43. We're going manual. Do it. Riker had the handgun up. Not pointed at anything yet. Carried low, muzzle toward the floor. The way you carry a weapon when you're moving through your own building and the threat hasn't fully materialized in front of you. He moved toward the corridor entrance and put his back against the wall beside the door frame. Old habit. The kind of positioning that became automatic after enough years of operating in spaces where the geometry of a room was the difference between walking out and not. Soren had the building schematic pulled up on the rebooted secondary screen. He was marking positions, his people, Cole's people, the confirmed Helix locations on the feeds that had come back online. Red dots and blue dots and the distances between them measured in seconds of movement. They have 3 in the stairwell, he said. 2 on the roof are holding. The team in the service corridor is still staged. They haven't moved since the power cut. They're waiting for the stairwell team to breach, Riker said. Coordinated entry. All points simultaneously. Soren looked up from the screen. They want to overwhelm the floor all at once. No time to respond in multiple directions. How long? Daxen said. 2 minutes. Maybe less. Salem was standing in the center of the room. He had not moved toward the door. Had not moved toward the screens. He was standing where he had been when the lights went out, beside Daxen, shoulder forward, facing the same direction. His breathing was controlled. Not easy, controlled, which was different, the kind that takes effort and decision rather than calm. Daxen glanced at him once. Fast. The look people give when they need to know if someone is going to hold. Salem held. There's a secondary corridor behind the equipment bay, Salem said. Both brothers looked at him. The panel on the left side of the bay. Behind the communications rack. He kept his voice even. It connects to the maintenance shaft that runs between 48 and 49. I found it 8 months ago when I was cataloging the storage inventory. I never asked about it because I assumed it wasn't my business. A beat of silence. It exits into the private elevator corridor on 49, Salem continued, which has its own power supply. Soren pulled up the schematic. Found the shaft. Traced it. He's right, Soren said. There was something in his voice. Not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. It exits 30 feet from the private elevator. That elevator runs on the independent grid. They won't have it covered, Riker said. It's not on any public floor plan. Move, Daxen said. He stepped toward the equipment bay. Soren was already at the communications rack, pulling it forward on its floor track. It rolled smoothly, designed to move. Another thing Salem had walked past without understanding. Behind it, the panel. Daxen pressed the release and the wall section opened inward. Dark shaft. Utility lighting along the floor. Just enough. He turned to Salem. You go second. Between Soren and me. Salem nodded once. They moved. The shaft was narrow, single file, low ceiling, the smell of concrete and old wiring. Soren first, then Salem, then Daxen. Riker stayed behind to hold the main room position with Cole's team. The plan was 60 seconds, long enough for the stairwell team to breach the floor and find the room defended, long enough for the roof team to start their descent, and long enough for Salem to be somewhere else entirely. They were 40 seconds into the shaft when they heard the main room door come open behind them. Then they heard Riker's voice, sharp, authoritative, not backing down from anything. Then another voice that wasn't Riker's. Then impact, movement, the particular acoustic signature of a close-quarters fight in a hard-walled room carrying through 40 feet of concrete shaft. Salem's pace didn't break. Neither did Daxen's directly behind him. 20 seconds later, the shaft ended. Soren pressed the exit panel and the wall opened into the private elevator corridor on 49, wide, clean, gold-lit, completely different in character from the red-soaked emergency lighting they'd left behind. The elevator was there. Doors closed. The display showed it was on this floor, waiting. Soren hit the call button. The doors opened immediately. All three stepped in. The doors closed. And then, before the elevator moved, the shaft panel at the far end of the corridor opened. A figure stepped through. Black tactical gear. Helix patch on the left shoulder. He had a weapon raised before he fully cleared the opening, and he swept the corridor and found it empty and then found the elevator. Glass-faced interior visible and found Salem standing in it. The agent moved fast, covering the corridor in long strides, weapon up, eyes on Salem through the glass. The elevator didn't move fast enough. The agent reached the doors in the last second before they sealed and drove his hand into the gap. The door's resistance mechanism kicked in, stopped, started to reopen. Daxen's hand came over Salem's shoulder. He drove the door close button and held it. The elevator's manual override engaged and the doors pressed shut with a force the resistance mechanism couldn't counter. The agent's wrist caught between the doors. The sound was specific and final. The doors sealed. The elevator rose. Salem stood with his back against the rear wall, breathing, not panicking, just breathing, bringing the heart rate down through deliberate effort, the way you manage a system that has been pushed past its easy range. Daxen was facing forward. His jaw was set. His hand was still on the control panel. Soren was watching the floor display count upward. Riker, Salem said. He's fine, Daxen said. You don't know that. I know Riker. The elevator reached 50. Daxen's hand moved to his phone. He dialed. 2 rings. Talk to me. Riker's voice came back, slightly elevated. A single cut on the vowels that meant he was moving fast. Room's clear. 2 down. Cole has the floor. A pause. The sound of a door closing. I'm coming up. Don't start anything good without me. Daxen ended the call. Salem let out a breath. The elevator reached 52. The penthouse private floor, above the main operational level, accessible only through this elevator and one other that required a key that existed in 3 copies. The doors opened to a room that was quieter than anything below it. Dark glass on 3 sides. The city spread in every direction, enormous and ordinary and alive. Salem stepped out and moved to the nearest window. He pressed one hand flat against the glass and stood there. Soren appeared beside him, not speaking, just present. The specific quality of presence that Soren had always had, the kind that didn't push, didn't perform, didn't fill space with unnecessary words. After a moment he reached out and did something that surprised both of them. He took Salem's hand. Not a grip, not a hold, just a placement. His fingers alongside Salem's, covering them, steady and warm and entirely without apology. Salem looked at their hands. He didn't pull away. The bond shifted. Both of them felt it. Not imagined, not metaphorical, but physical. A warmth that started at the point of contact and moved through Salem's arm and into his chest and settled there like something that had been looking for that exact location for a very long time. Soren didn't move. Salem didn't move. Daxen stood in the center of the room behind them, watching, and said nothing. His phone lit up on the table. A message from Riker, 1 line. Bond is locking. I felt it from the stairwell. It's not stopping. Daxen read it once. Set the phone down. He already knew. Chapter 7. The Truth of the Experiment. Riker arrived on 52 with blood on his collar and a hard drive in his left hand. He set the drive on the table between them without preamble. No explanation of where it came from or what it cost to get it. The bruise forming along his jaw suggested the cost had been physical. He sat down, cracked his neck once, and looked at Soren. "Decrypt it," he said. Soren connected it to the isolated workstation. Air-gapped, no network connection, the machine they used exclusively for material that could not risk external exposure. The drive's encryption was layered but not sophisticated. Whoever built it had prioritized access speed over security, which meant it was designed to be read quickly in field conditions, not protected against seizure. That was a mistake. The decryption ran for 11 minutes. Nobody spoke during those 11 minutes. Salem sat at the far end of the table, the pendant back in his hands. He had retrieved it from the surface where he'd set it earlier and hadn't put it down since, turning it over and over between his fingers the way some people worry a stone. Daxen stood by the window. Riker poured himself a drink, drank half of it, and left the glass alone. The drive opened. Files. Hundreds of them. Organized with the clean taxonomy of people who expected to need to find things quickly. Labeled by year, by subject number, by project phase. Soren moved through them with practice speed, scanning headers, flagging documents, building a picture in layers. 20 minutes in, he stopped. He read one file through to the end. Then he read it again. "Salem," he said. His voice was level. The specific level of someone who has decided to deliver information cleanly and let the recipient react however they need to react. "They weren't just studying you," Soren said. Helix built their entire second-generation program around your genetic profile. Every trial they ran after you, every subject in every facility, was an attempt to replicate what you are. He turned the screen. 14 years. 41 facilities. More than 300 subjects. The room went completely still. None of them achieved full bond activation, Soren continued. Partial results. Temporary stabilization. Subjects who bonded with one alpha and collapsed when a second was introduced. Subjects who showed the profile on paper and failed entirely in application. He looked at Salem directly. "You are not one of many. You are the only completed version of something they have been trying to rebuild since the day you walked out of that facility." Salem set the pendant down on the table. "If Helix controls me," he said slowly, "they can bond me to alpha leaders of their choosing." "Yes. And those leaders become stable, controlled, predictable, manageable," Riker said. The word landed flat and heavy. Every major crime organization in this country is run by alpha leadership. Territory disputes, power vacuums, the violence that comes with both. Helix doesn't want to eliminate the organizations. They want to own the people running them. A bonded alpha is not a diminished alpha. He's a directed one. He looked at Salem. "You are the most powerful leverage instrument that has ever existed in this world. And you've been cleaning our floors." Salem looked at the table. Not down, through it, the way you look when you are seeing something that isn't in front of you. "The pendant," he said. Soren pulled it toward him. Looked at the symbol on its face. "It's a Helix project marker. This specific iteration was used to identify active subjects during the facility years. Anyone who knew the system would recognize it as a current asset tag." He set it back. "They weren't just marking you. They were marking you as theirs. You took it from evidence," Salem said. "Years ago. We took it from the man who was sent to locate you 4 years before we found you first," Daxen said from the window. He turned. "He didn't make it back to report." Salem processed that. The specific weight of it. The violence that had been running quietly alongside his ordinary life for longer than he'd understood. Riker scrolled deeper into the files. He stopped on a section dated 18 months back and opened a project document that ran 40 pages. He read the summary. His expression didn't change in any way that was visible from across the table, but his hand paused on the mouse for a moment longer than function required. "There's something else," he said. He turned the screen. The document was titled, "Varelli Triplets, projected bond targets. Phase 3 confirmation. Salem looked at it, then at Riker. They predicted it, Riker said. Before any of this started. Before we found your file, before we hired you, before any contact between us. He pointed to a section near the bottom of the summary page. Helix ran projection modeling on omega bond compatibility across all active alpha networks in the Chicago territory. O17's profile generated one result. One match for full concurrent tribond. He paused. Us. The silence in the room had a different quality now. Not the silence of shock. The silence of something arriving that had always been inevitable and had simply been taking its time. They knew we would bond with you, Daxen said. They designed it, Soren said quietly. The placement, the circumstances. They needed a tribond alpha network stabilized and directed. They needed the most powerful criminal organization in Chicago under Helix influence. And they knew the only way to accomplish that was through a completed bond. He looked at Salem. They were going to position you, create a situation where you and the three of us came into proximity and let the biology do the rest. They never needed to force it, Riker said. They just needed to put you in the right room. Salem stood. He walked to the window. Stood beside Daxen without looking at him, both of them facing the city, the lights running in every direction below as far as the eye could carry. Everything that happened, Salem said, the job, coming here, all of it, was not their plan, Daxen said. The certainty in his voice was absolute. We found you before they could position you. We brought you here on our terms. The bond that is forming. He paused, choosing the words with the careful precision of someone who does not say things they don't mean. Is not their design. It is ours. Salem turned and looked at him. Daxen held the look without moving. The three of us have protected you for 4 years, Daxen said. Not because Helix wanted us to. Not because of what you represent. Because of who you are inside this building. Every day. He paused. That belongs to us, not to them. Salem was quiet for a long moment. Then, what do they have left? Riker was already back at the screen. He had been reading while Daxen spoke, because Riker always read, and his expression had settled into the particular stillness that meant he had found the piece of information that changed the shape of everything that had come before it. He looked up. That's what I need to tell you, he said. Chapter 8. Betrayal Inside the Empire. The security board went dark at 2:47 in the morning. Not a section. Not a feed. The entire board, every camera, every sensor, every motion detector across all 14 secured floors, went offline simultaneously and completely. The kind of shutdown that required physical access to the master relay panel. The kind of panel that was behind 2 biometric locks in a room that existed on no floor plan accessible from outside the organization. Someone inside had opened it. Soren was at the workstation in under 4 seconds. His fingers moved across the keyboard with controlled urgency. Rerouting, attempting manual overrides, trying to restore even partial coverage. He got 3 cameras back on 48 before the secondary relay dropped too. It's not a hack, he said. Someone is physically in the relay room. Which floor? Daxen said. 46. Subpanel access corridor behind the east service closet. Soren looked up. That corridor requires a staff-level keycard and knowledge of the building layout that isn't in any documentation we've released externally. The word "we've released externally" sat in the room and meant what it meant. Riker was already pulling the access log for the 46th floor key card system. He had the timestamp in 30 seconds. He had the card ID in 45. He ran it against their personnel database and the match loaded, and he looked at it without speaking for a moment. Then he said the name. Desmond. The room received it like a physical thing. Desmond Okafor. 8 years with the organization. Brought in personally by Riker after a vetting process that had taken 4 months. Ran logistics for the North Side operation. Had access to 3 of their 4 secure facilities. Had sat at their table for planning sessions more times than Salem had restocked the coffee. Daxen's expression did not change. That was the most frightening version of him. Where is he now? Daxen said. Riker pulled the last active location from Desmond's card. He badged into the 46th floor corridor at 2:31. He hasn't badged out. He looked at the personnel grid. His assigned position was the North Security Station. He should have been on post since midnight. He left post and nobody flagged it, Soren said. Nobody flagged it because he submitted a log entry at 11 p.m. showing his post check-in, Riker said. Manually entered. Backdated to look automated. He set the tablet down. He's been planning this for at least a week. A single alert tone cut through the room. Then another. Then a sustained cascade of them, the alarm system's way of communicating what the cameras could no longer show. Motion sensors on 45, 46, and 47 activating in sequence. Multiple simultaneous triggers. Not one target moving through a floor. The team. They're in, Soren said. The penthouse's physical reinforcement engaged automatically, the protocol that activated when the digital perimeter failed. Steel shutters behind the glass on the main room windows. Magnetic door seals on every internal entrance. The safe room corridor off the kitchen pressurizing. All of it running on the independent power supply that the main board shutdown had not reached. Cole's voice came through the tactical radio. Strained but steady. Multiple hostiles on 46 and rising. Armed, professional, coordinated entry. We have 4 of ours wounded on the lower floor. I need authorization to escalate response. Authorized, Daxen said. Copy. The radio filled with movement and instruction and the specific controlled chaos of trained people doing their jobs under the worst conditions their jobs could produce. Salem moved to the tactical station beside Soren without being asked. He pulled up the motion sensor grid, the only active information layer still running. Dots. Moving. 8 of them on the 2 floors below, converging upward. They're splitting, Salem said. 3 are moving to the stairwell. The other 5 are going for the service elevator. Soren looked at the grid. He's right. They know the layout, Riker said. Desmond gave them the layout. Not just the layout, Soren said. He was reading something on the secondary screen, the access log running deeper, past tonight's entries and into the preceding weeks. His expression went flat in a specific way. He's been running access reports for the past 19 days. Staff positioning, shift schedules, security rotation patterns. He looked at Riker. He mapped everything, every protocol, every person. When we eat, when we sleep, when we're at maximum and minimum capacity. 19 days, Daxen said. The Helix retrieval order reactivated 22 days ago, Riker said. 3 days to make contact. 19 days to build the map. Salem watched the dots on the motion grid. The 3 in the stairwell had reached 48. The 5 in the service elevator were at 47 and slowing. Stopping, floor selected, doors about to open. They're going to hit both access points at once, Salem said. Give us 30 seconds of warning before the elevator opens, Daxen said to him. 20 seconds, Salem said, watching the indicator. Doors are starting to open now. Daxen moved. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not clean, and it was not quiet, and it was not the kind of violence that looked like anything from a distance. It was close and immediate and decided by the people who knew the building better than the people coming through it. Cole's team held the stairwell. Riker met the elevator team in the service corridor with the particular efficiency of a man who had been waiting for them to arrive. Daxen covered the connecting passage between the 2 entry points, the choke point that Desmond's map had shown as the most efficient route to the upper floor. Salem stayed on the sensor grid and called positions. Not cowering. Not hiding. Working, running information to 3 men who needed it in real time and using the one tool he had that none of the Helix team could account for. He knew this building. He had spent 3 years inside its rhythms. He knew which corridor ran long and which ran short and where the acoustics changed and where the ceiling height dropped and where a person moving fast would have to slow down because the turn came faster than the floor plan suggested. He called every single one. The last Helix operative went down in the kitchen corridor at 3:08. The building went quiet. Actual quiet. The operational kind. The silence that follows completed action, populated by breathing and the settling of adrenaline and the specific weight of aftermath. Riker appeared in the doorway, a cut above his left eye, moving fine. He looked at Salem at the sensor grid, and something in his expression shifted in a way that was not easy to read and did not need to be read aloud. "Position on Desmond," Daxen said to Cole over the radio. A pause. "He's gone," Cole said. 46th floor, secondary exit. Badge record shows he swiped out at 2:49. 2 minutes after the board went dark. Another pause. "There was a vehicle waiting on the service road. We have partial plates." The room absorbed that. Desmond was gone. 8 years. Their table. Their plans. Their trust. Gone with the people who had just tried to take Salem out of this building in pieces. Daxen looked at Salem across the room. Salem looked back. "We find him," Daxen said. It wasn't a question and it wasn't a plan. It was a statement of what was already decided. Chapter 9. False Victory. By 4 in the morning, the building was clear. Cole ran 3 full sweeps, top to bottom, every corridor, every shaft, every space large enough to hold a person, and came back the same each time. Clean. The Helix team that had come through the doors was accounted for. The external positions had withdrawn when the internal operation failed, pulling back with the disciplined speed of a contractor unit that understood when a mission window had closed. The SUVs were gone from the service road. The roof was empty. The city below ran its pre-dawn patterns like nothing had happened. Like 40 stories up, a small group of people had not just held a line that mattered enormously and that the world outside would never know about. Cole gave his final confirmation at 4:17 and signed off to start the recovery process. Casualties to manage, damage to assess, protocols to rebuild now that the board had been compromised. The 4 of them sat in the 52nd floor room for the first time that night with nothing immediate requiring their response. Soren poured coffee, not because anyone asked, because it was 4 in the morning and it was the right thing to do. He set a cup in front of each of them and sat down and wrapped both hands around his own and let the warmth move into his palms. Riker had a bandage over the cut above his eye now. Applied by himself, slightly crooked, in the manner of a man who considered medical attention for minor wounds an interruption rather than a necessity. He was reviewing the access logs from the relay room, not urgently, methodically, the way you review something after the immediate crisis has passed and the information becomes about understanding rather than response. Daxen sat at the window, not watching the city for threats now, just watching it. The particular stillness of a man who has been at maximum operating capacity for hours and has finally given himself permission to simply be present in a room. Salem sat across from Soren and held his coffee with both hands. He felt different. Not in a way he could articulate immediately. More like the feeling of having stood in a storm and come through it and standing now in the after air. Everything still registering, the body still reading the experience, but the experience itself finished. He turned the cup slowly. Let the quiet hold. "You called every position," Riker said without looking up from the logs. Salem glanced at him. "The sensor grid. You ran it the whole time. Every call was accurate." Riker turned a page. Cole said his team was working on information that was 40 seconds ahead of what their own equipment would have given them. He paused. "That's the difference between 4 wounded and something worse." Salem didn't answer. Not because he had nothing to say, because the observation sat in a place inside him that wasn't ready to be spoken about yet. He had done what needed doing. That was all. Soren looked at him over the rim of his cup. The bond between them, the one that had started at the window earlier, when Soren had placed his hand over Salem's and neither of them had pulled back, was still present. Sitting quietly between them like a frequency that had been tuned and was now running, not intrusively but undeniably. Soren could feel Salem's emotional state the way you feel weather coming before the sky changes. Not the details of it, the shape. He felt something loosening. Not completely. Not all at once. But loosening the way things loosen when a person has been holding on for a very long time and has finally arrived somewhere that might, for the first time, be safe enough to let go of the grip slightly. "You don't want to leave," Soren said. He didn't make it into a question. He said it the way you name a thing you've been watching someone carry. Salem's hands stilled on the cup. He looked at the table. The pendant was there between them, where he'd set it during the review session hours ago. Caught the low light and held it. He stared at it for a long moment. This small metal thing that had traveled from a facility designed to erase him, through years of hands that had been hunting him and had ended up here, in this room, in this specific quiet, between people who had chosen, without being asked and without being required, to place themselves between him and everything that wanted to take him back. No, he said, I don't. The honesty of it sat in the room without decoration. Salem had spent 3 years here not knowing the full shape of what he was inside. Not knowing that every day he walked these corridors something in him was orienting toward these 3 men the way a plant orients toward light. Not through decision, through nature. Not knowing that the bond working quietly in his biology had been finding its configuration for 36 months while he folded linen and refilled coffee and told himself he was only staff. He knew now, and knowing did not make him want to run. That was the thing that surprised him most. Daxen turned from the window. He crossed the room and sat down across from Salem, not at the table's end where authority sat but directly across. Close. Equal. He looked at Salem for a moment without speaking, the way Daxen always preceded something he had chosen his words for carefully. Then don't, Daxen said. Simple. Final. Not a negotiation. Not an invitation with conditions attached. Just a door held open by a man who had decided, some time ago, that this was where Salem belonged and had simply been waiting for Salem to arrive at the same conclusion on his own terms and in his own time. Salem held his gaze for a long beat. Something between them, not the bond, beneath the bond, the actual human thing that the bond was built on, settled into a position that felt permanent. The way a key sounds different when it finds the right lock. Soren exhaled once, quietly. Riker set down the access logs. For a moment, one full, unrepeatable moment, the 4 of them occupied the room together without agenda, without threat, without the weight of everything that had been running at them all night. The city spread beyond the glass, brilliant and indifferent, doing what cities do. Then Riker's phone lit up on the table. He looked at the screen. His expression shifted, the smallest movement, a tightening at the corners of his eyes, the adjustment of a man recalibrating from rest to response. Riker, Daxen said. Riker turned the phone around. One message. No sender identification. Routed, bounced, deliberately untraceable except to someone who knew exactly how to trace it, which meant it was meant to be found by people with the capability to find it. Meant to be read. It read, "Tonight was a test. You passed. We already have what we came for. H." The quiet in the room changed its character entirely. They came for something specific, Soren said, his voice shifting back to operational register. The team tonight wasn't here for Salem. Or not primarily, Riker said. He was already moving, accessing the encrypted drive, cross-referencing the Helix files they'd decrypted earlier. They had access to this floor. Desmond gave them the layout and the window. If they wanted Salem out of this building tonight, they had the resources to do it. But they didn't, Daxen said. No. Riker stopped on a file. Read it. Read it again. They were never here for him. He looked up. They were here for a sample. The room went cold. Desmond was in the medical storage bay on 46 for 11 minutes before he reached the relay room, Riker said. 11 minutes. The relay shutdown takes 4. He had 7 minutes in there doing something else. The medical bay holds biological samples, Soren said quietly. Riker nodded. Salem had a blood panel done 8 months ago, Soren said. Standard staff health screening. The sample was stored in the 46th floor bay as part of the routine archive. Salem stared at the phone in the center of the table. The message. Short. Calm. The confidence of people who had gotten exactly what they came for while everyone else was busy fighting a battle that was designed to be a distraction. We already have what we came for. His DNA. 8 months sitting in a building he thought was safe. 8 months in a bay behind a corridor he had never been told to worry about. What can they do with it? Salem said. Soren's jaw was tight. Everything they couldn't do without it. Chapter 10. The real war begins. The message sat on the table between them like a lit fuse. Nobody touched it. Nobody looked away from it for long. It had the quality of something that reorganized the room it was in, all the previous information, all the previous threats, all the battles fought and won tonight, reshaping themselves in its light into something that now read differently than it had an hour ago. Riker pulled the Helix files back up on the workstation. Not searching. He knew what he was looking for. He'd read it earlier and filed it as secondary because there had been more immediate things to deal with. Now he found the section and expanded it and read it through once more with the context that the message provided. He was quiet for a long time after. "Talk," Daxen said. Riker turned the screen. Project Genesis, Phase 3. Subject O17 DNA acquisition. Objectives: reconstruct full O17 genetic sequence from biological sample. Synthesize multibond omega profile via artificial embryonic development. Produce minimum 3 viable O17 derivative subjects. Timeline: 18 months post-acquisition. The words sat on the screen in clean institutional font, stripped of all the horror they carried. "They don't need him anymore," Salem said. Not as a question. As the realization forming in real time, each word placed carefully as he understood the shape of what he was looking at. "They needed your complete genetic sequence," Riker said, "which they couldn't reconstruct from the records they had. Those were fragmentary, taken when you were a child, incomplete by the time the facility network shut down. They needed an adult sample. Current. Whole." He paused. "Now they have it. They're going to build more of me," Salem said. The room was absolutely still. "Derivatives," Soren said. "Not copies, the genetics aren't that simple. But subjects with enough of the O17 profile to potentially carry the multibond capacity. If even one of the 3 they're projecting achieves full activation." He stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "One successfully bonded derivative," Daxen said, "placed with the right alpha network. Control," Riker said. "Not of one organization. Not of Chicago. They've been running the projection models for years. We saw that in the files. They know which territories, which leaders, which alliances would restructure the entire national landscape if the alpha networks operating them were simultaneously stabilized and directed." He closed the file. 3 derivatives. 3 targets. 3 organizations under Helix influence. "And they're already 18 months into the development window by acquisition," Soren said. Salem looked at the window. The city below was beginning its transition from night to early morning. The sky still dark, but with the faint pre-dawn quality of light that was considering its arrival. Traffic increasing on the streets far below. A world waking up that had no idea what was being designed inside it. He thought about the children, the 41 facilities, the 300 subjects. He thought about what it meant to be grown in a laboratory for someone else's purpose before you had any language to understand what was happening to you or any power to refuse it. He thought about 3 people who would be born into that, into a life that was already decided, already aimed, already shaped around a function they hadn't chosen. Something moved through him that wasn't anger and wasn't fear. It was older than both of those. It was the specific clarity that arrives when a person stops asking what is happening to them and starts deciding what they are going to do about it. "We destroy the lab," Salem said. He said it without drama. Without the performance of resolution. Just the statement of a decision already made. "We don't know where it is," Riker said. "We know where Desmond went," Salem said. He turned from the window. "He left with the sample. He went to Helix. Which means as of tonight, he knows where the development facility is." Riker looked at him for a moment. "You want to find Desmond," Daxen said. "I want to find what he led us to," Salem said. "And I want to end it before any of those 3 development subjects reach viability." He looked at each of them in turn, Soren, then Riker, then Daxen, holding each gaze for a beat. "They were built for the same purpose I was. They didn't choose that. Nobody should carry that life." The room held the weight of that. Soren looked at his brothers. Something passed between the 3 of them. the specific communication that existed in the space between people who had known each other long enough and deeply enough that language was sometimes the slow route to understanding. Daxen turned to the tactical board. He pulled up the partial plates from Desmond's exit vehicle, ran them through their network, not the police network, not the federal database, their network, which accessed information that official channels couldn't touch and returned results in minutes rather than days. The plates came back to a vehicle registered to a logistics company in Indianapolis. The logistics company's corporate filing listed a registered agent. The registered agent's address was a commercial property in Louisville, Kentucky. The commercial property in Louisville shared a utility account with 4 adjacent parcels. One of those parcels had a subterranean structure that did not appear on any public building permit. Soren was already on it. Cross-referencing the subterranean address against the Helix facility architecture from the decrypted files, the building signatures their research division used, the power consumption patterns, the HVAC specifications required for the kind of controlled environment laboratory that genetic development work demanded. The match came back at 94% confidence. Riker stood. He walked to the weapons case along the east wall, the one behind the panel that Salem now knew about, and began methodically checking inventory. Daxen moved to the communications board and opened a channel to Cole. Assemble the full response team. I want operational readiness in 4 hours. He paused. And I want Desmond found before we move. Alive. He knows the internal security layout of that facility. Copy, Cole said. Salem watched all 3 of them move into the orchestration of something large and certain and already in motion. The efficiency of it. The coordination. The specific quality of 3 people who operated as a single system because they had spent a lifetime building that trust. He stood at the window for one more moment. The city below was fully in its pre-dawn now. The sky along the east edge beginning to carry the faintest possible suggestion of a color that wasn't night. Somewhere out there, in a building that didn't appear on public maps, 3 development subjects were in their 18th month of a process they had never consented to. He was going to reach them before the process finished, whatever it cost. Daxen appeared beside him at the window, not performing presence, just arriving the way he always arrived, certain, direct, occupying space like he had decided to be in it. He looked at the city. Salem looked at the city. Looks like they just declared war, Daxen said quietly. Soren stepped up on Salem's other side. Close. The warmth of him carrying across the small distance between them. He looked at the lights below, then at Salem, then back at the horizon. Good, he said. Riker's voice came from behind them, dry and flat and carrying the particular energy of a man who has been doing dangerous things for a long time and has made his peace with the fact that they will not stop. We were getting bored. The pistol clicked as he loaded it. Nobody moved from the window. The 4 of them stood in a line against the glass, 40 stories above a city that had no idea what was coming, watching the first thin edge of dawn begin its arrival over Chicago. And across the ocean, in a facility that appeared on no map, in a laboratory kept at exactly the right temperature for the work being done inside it, a door opened. White walls, controlled light, the soft mechanical hum of equipment running around the clock. 3 chambers, 3 figures inside them. Same height, same build, same particular quality to the face. The cheekbones, the jaw, the set of the eyes. That would be immediately recognizable to anyone who had spent 3 years cleaning the floors of a Chicago penthouse. All 3 had Salem's face, and all 3 were beginning to wake up. What are your thoughts now that Helix has 3 Omega prototypes with Salem's face? Do you think the triplets have what it takes to destroy the lab before those 3 subjects fully awaken? Or is this war already lost before it begins? Drop your answer in the comments right now and tell me who you think is the most dangerous person in this story, because the answer might surprise you in Chapter 11.
Could Dax have earned Salem's trust sooner if he had been honest from the beginning? Should Salem have continued risking everything for someone who once saw him as nothing more than a servant? While protecting someone can come from love, trust can only grow when honesty has a place beside it. The story of Salem and Dax may have come to an end, but countless other stories are still unfolding around us, each becoming another colourful piece of life's ever-growing mosaic. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with Blue Fox BL. We truly appreciate your support. If you're listening tonight, we wish you a peaceful night and a restful sleep. And if you're listening while working or going about your day, we wish you a wonderful day filled with happiness, success, and many good things ahead.